Okay, hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today in this cold room. We really appreciate it. My name is Hans. I am a researcher, administrator, and curator here at Concordia University, and I will be co-hosting tonight's SICA talk along with Professor Juan Ortiz-Apuy. And we're so thrilled to welcome the Concordia artists in residence, Lorna Bauer and Mia Donovan. A reminder for those who may be new that Conversations in Contemporary Art is a visiting artist lecture series based within the MFA program in the Department of Studio Arts here at Concordia University. We want to acknowledge that Concordia University is located on unceded indigenous lands. The Ganyangehaga are recognized as the caretakers of this island, known as Jojage, which is also a traditional gathering place for the Algonquin, whose name for it is Mooniang, and other indigenous nations and diverse communities. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relations with Indigenous and other peoples in the Montreal community. So before I hand things off to Juan, I'll just provide some general reminders. This conversation is being recorded and it will be available via SICA's YouTube channel at a later date. Following Lorna and Mia's presentations, Juan will moderate a Q&A and I will run the microphone to amplify the questions from the audience. And then we're hoping to wrap around 7:30. We invite you guys to join us afterwards for drinks. And actually, there's also an opening reception or a vernissage at the MFA gallery. So please check it out on your way out. They'll be there until 9 p.m. Okay, so let's get started. I want to introduce Juan Ortiz-Apuy, who is a Canadian-Costa Rican artist who has been living and working in Montreal, Jojage, since 2003. His work has been exhibited across Canada and internationally and has been awarded numerous grants from the Canada Council for the Arts, the Conseil des Arts Stades du Québec, and the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council. Most recently, he was a recipient of the Best International Representation Award by the International Association of Art Critics, and he has completed several artist in residence programs, most notably at Mass MoCA, the Vermont Studio Center, the Franz Marcel Center, and the Gulyago International Ceramic Research Center. Juan.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for the reminder about the opening at the MFA Gallery. So I promised Daniel Rumbold that I would tell everybody. So 6 to 9 p.m., come and support Daniel right after this invigorating talk that we have coming up. Welcome, everybody. Happy to see so many faces in this intimate conversation that we're going to have today. I think I know most of you, but if you don't know me, my name is Juan. I teach in the sculpture program. I am really excited to introduce our speakers tonight, and I will be brief as I'm sure you're eager to hear about them and not myself. But I truly think that we are very lucky to have these two artists as artists in residence in our Faculty of Fine Arts for the past 2 years. I am a resolute fan of their work and proud to be their colleague. And if you have had the chance to be in a classroom with them, I'm sure that you are, like me, also a fan of their teaching. Lorna Bauer lives and works in Montreal. Bauer's work has been featured in numerous solo and collective exhibitions in Canada and abroad. The Musée d'Art Contemporain de Montréal, the Darling Foundry, YYZ Artist Outlet, Franz Kaka, Eleftheria Gallery, Senecta Gallery in Athens. She has been an artist in residence at Despina, Rio de Janeiro, the Récollet in Paris, the Quebec, New York residency, BAM Center, and the Atlantic Center for the Arts, which we just kind of realized that we were there at a very similar time, and that was great. Her works are present in public and private collections, notably the Musée d'Art Contemporain de Montréal, the Musée National des Beaux-Arts de Québec. Writing on Bauer's work has been featured in numerous publications such as Art Forum, Canadian Art, C Magazine, Les Devoirs, among other media outlets. She has received grants from the Canada Council, the Montreal Council for the Arts, and CALC. In 2019, Bauer was awarded the Barbara Ford Memorial Award for Contemporary Canadian Photography, and in 2021, she was a finalist for the Sobi Art Award representing Quebec. Now, on the other corner, Mia Donovan is a filmmaker, photographer, and digital storyteller based in Montreal. She has written and directed 3 featured documentaries, Inside Lara Rocks 2011, Deprogram 2015, and Dope is Death 2020. Her films have been presented worldwide at film festivals, on TV broadcasts, theatrically, and on digital platforms like Netflix. In 2016, she wrote and directed her first visual virtual reality experience called Deprogram VR, which won the coveted IDFA Dog Club Award for Digital Storytelling that year. Her work has been supported by the Canada Council, the Conseil des Arts et des Lettres du Québec, SODEC, Telefilm, Canadian Media Fund, Women Make Films, and Chicken and Egg Pictures. Donovan is currently developing her first narrative feature film, her first documentary limited series, and a new photo series. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Mia and Lorna.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. And thank you, Juan, for that introduction. Much appreciated. Okay. Oh, the format is off. I don't know if... Oh, okay. Great. So I'm an artist that works in a variety of mediums, mainly in photography, but in recent years, I've started making objects in blown glass that are combined with sculptural assemblages. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay. But ultimately, for now, I see my work as an installation practice. So with my work, I examine human relationships to their surroundings, and I often focus on a particular figure, place, or a moment in history that has caused us to question how we engage with our natural surroundings. I'm particularly drawn to historical and cultural figures, architectural sites, and legacies in my work. These projects tend to be site-specific and responsive to a particular place and context. So I'm going to start by showing my most recent body of work. It's titled Air is Where Effort Goes. And this series consisted of 17 blown glass and steel sculptures. Initially, I've shown this work 3 times, and the first installation was in Toronto at a gallery Nicolas Robert. And these pieces were accompanied by a single black and white image of a spider in its web. You can see there. This black and white image of the spider, I actually took it in my garden in the pandemic, during the pandemic in 2020, the summer of 2020. And I kind of went out into my garden each day and kind of fed it these little caterpillars that had been eating this rose bush and get it to coax it out. And I ended up getting this shot, which was quite a challenge with a 4x5 camera. And with this piece, I was attempting to draw parallels between the spider in the web and the blown glass works, namely delineating space as volume and oscillating between strength and fragility and control and chance. Also, for me, I was trying to ground this body of work in a body, albeit an insect body, but I was still hoping that association would be suggested. Here's a close-up. So the second iteration of this work was shown at Musée de Joliette in 2022, curated by Anne-Marie Saint-Jean Aube, and it was a group exhibition. So this work up here on the right is not mine. It's Marie-Claire Blais, who's a fantastic Montreal-based artist. And so this exhibition was a group exhibition of 7 women identifying artists. And this exhibition explored themes of going beyond the frame or breaking the glass ceiling. And then on the left is those two-dimensional pieces are Nadege. Those also aren't mine. And then finally, the last chance I had to show this work was in the summer of 2022 at Arsenal in New York. And that was curated by Anais Castro. It was also a group show. And so the pieces, she only decided to exhibit a selection of them. I believe there were 7. and they were peppered throughout the space, and so sort of in conversation with other artists' work. So that's Shannon Boole's piece behind, who some of you might be familiar with. So the origins of this project started in 2018 with two found wire trash cans. And at the time I was experimenting with blowing glass into metal. And the impetus for this really was a research trip I'd done in Rio de Janeiro, where there was these trash cans basically suspended up in the air holding these bromeliad structures. And I'd gone to Rio to specifically make work and research the acclaimed Brazilian landscape architect and conservationist Roberto Brilli Marx. And I gained permission to access his former home, which is on the outskirts of Rio, about 45 minutes to an hour outside of Rio. And the grounds were called the Sitio, and they're a sprawling 200-acre property containing several greenhouses, his indoor studio, outdoor studio, a church, and his former home. He's no longer alive. So researching and photographing on these grounds, it was an extremely fruitful time for me, and a number of projects came out of this, both directly and indirectly. So these are shots that I took. I often, when I'm going and doing a research trip, will carry multiple cameras with me, and I'll have my more serious 4x5 or medium format, and then I'll have a little 35 millimeter. And so these are just sort of snapshots that I took on the grounds that inadvertently ended up being the inspiration for the blown glass pieces. So initially, because the two first pieces were found trash cans, I wanted to continue in that vein and have all of the works be found, all of the trash cans be found. But that became increasingly difficult, and especially with the pandemic. So I ended up fabricating the other 15. And initially, also, I wasn't entirely convinced by these pieces, or I wasn't sure of them. I found them maybe a tad awkward, and on the larger side, kind of much, much bigger than anything I've ever done before. They're about 30 inches high. But a good friend of mine, Ashes Weithman, who is a Vancouver-based artist, he had invited me to show one of these I believe it was 2021, in this little project space that he was running in Montreal. And through conversations with him that I really started to see the value in these works, and then it's from there that I expanded upon the series. And so this image here is from this little project space that he was running out of his shed in the back of his home. And this work was paired with, this is a detail here. This work was paired with a piece by Anne Lau, who's a brilliant weaver. And so this is her piece called A Silk Sack for Attire, and A Blown Glass Trash Can was the title of the show. Oh, sorry, I just wanted to say, so with these pieces as well, as I started to kind of develop the series, I began to think of them as a stand-in for a human form or a lung, and the bodies that inhabit this space. And I started to see them as a means to make the breath visible and kind of turn the inside out, and the metal bars becoming a rib cage that contains this air. And I went to go blow these pieces with this amazing Czech glass blower that I work with, who lives in the country. So what I tend to do is go and live with him. He has kind of a guest home for upwards of 5 days, and we really work on these pieces over that duration, and there's a whole team there. And that's always an interesting process, and I love going there. And it was through him blowing these massive works that I also saw these pieces as a doubling of his body, and kind of the lungs and the breath moving and being made visible by that process. So now I'm going to move on to another series. This is called Sitio Bottles. And similarly, it was, it started, the inspiration for this started from that trip to Rio where I was researching Burle Marx. And these took the form of blown glass vessels that were, once again, an embodiment of the human lung, and also the overabundance of plastic water bottles that were strewn on the beach or populated urban scenes, and which were also used for numerous purposes, such as suspended from trees to hold water for stray cats, and food for stray cats, and you could often on the streets see these half-cut water bottles strapped to trees with orchid species coming off of them, and I found that quite interesting. So I now have a total of 50 of these pieces, but the most I've ever shown at one time is 30. And initially, I had simply placed these pieces on the floor, like this. This was shown at Clint Ronish Gallery in Toronto. The previous one was at Franz Kaka. And for me, I just like the simplicity of the works placed on the floor and that tension between the glass and the fragility on this hard surface. This is a detail. So these pieces are made by casting water bottle and in a silica and plaster mold. And then hot glass is kind of molten glass that you're working with is then blown into the mold. The mold is then taken apart really quickly, worked on, and then put in an annealer to anneal it. That's when you put in an annealer, and then the temperature comes down very slowly, usually over 24 hours, so the piece doesn't crack. And so this right here is at the National Gallery, and this is the largest amount that I've shown in one time. There were 30 of these. I'd wanted to actually show more, but there was some space constraints, so I wasn't able to. And for this iteration, and this is the last time I believe I've shown them, I had this plinth made, this sort of rounded plinth. And this plinth was based on a topographical illustration of an unrealized metro project by Burle Marx. So I liked kind of the organic form and that relationship with that figure and the landscape architecture. And also for this show, even though it was strictly forbidden, I went back into production on a few of these. And I really wanted to use that occasion to try a new technique called mille fiori, which means 1,000 flowers in Italian. And it's this, I find it this beautiful technique where you pull, before you have your glass blowing session, leading up to it, a few days prior, you pull this glass into these extremely long strings, upwards of 20 feet. And with that glass, you wrap it in different colors, and then you take this, you essentially just end up chopping, once it cools, you take the cane and you chop it into these tiny little, kind of like small, like cookie-like things. And those become these little pucks, then are heated to the temperature of the glass. And then you roll the glass onto them and they become incorporated into the blown glass. But the glass that you use for this long cane is made with a stiffer material than the blown glass, so that when it's incorporated, they don't kind of become all askew and morphed. I mean, they do a little bit. This was my first attempt, but the idea is that they maintain their shape because of the different densities of the glass. So these are some inspiration shots that I was mentioning earlier about the bottles in the trees, and these I took just with my 35mm camera as research shots. This is I believe it's a bird feeder. I've been trying to figure it out. And these would be kind of everywhere, just kind of suspended in the trees. So the next project I'm going to talk about is called The Hand of Me. And this is Margaret Mee. It's the title's based on the figure of Margaret Mee, who's on the right there, and Burle Marx is on the left. So Margaret Mee was a longtime friend of Roberto Burle Marx and a botanical illustrator, environmental activist, and explorer. And she drew and painted these incredible botanical illustrations during her expeditions into the Amazon. And so the sculptural work you see in the foreground is called The Hand of Me, and it consists of plaster, blown glass, and cast glass. And really with this work, I was trying to make a faceless portrait of me, a three-dimensional interpretation in glass and plaster. I collected a number of steel mesh butcher gloves and used them to blow glass into, and created this sort of static anthropomorphic form resembling a hand. Again, I made these, I work with two different glass blowers, and I made these with Pavel, who's in the country, and he's just this phenomenal figure who's been blowing glass since he's 14. And this was, oddly enough, the most challenging thing that we'd done, which is kind of funny because of the size of them. They're really not that big compared to the large blown trash can works. And it was about the balance between getting the glass to the right temperature. And we figured out that the glass actually had to be relatively cold to be able to get it into the hand. Really quite cold. And it took, the first one, I think it took us about 4 hours to do. And then I've made about 30 of these now. And by the end of it, we've got it down to about 20 minutes. But it was challenging. So I've shown this piece 3 different times, and each time it's a different configuration. With this version, this was shown in Montreal at Nicolas Robert Gallery, and this is propped up on a large cast of a portable water container. And here you can see the details of that. And with this work as well, I incorporated diconic cast glass rope. And this is this incredible glass where you could see it here under fluorescent light, it's green. And then here under daylight, it's a rose color. So it completely shifts the color of the glass depending on the quality of the light. Now I'm going to finish with talking about a project that's in progress called Maison en bord de mer. And here's an image. These are made of steel, slumped glass, hand printed black and white photographs, and rare earth magnets. So the design of these pieces are loosely based on a mirror design by the Irish designer and architect Eileen Gray. I went to visit and research one of her homes in the south of France in 2017 at the Roquebrune Cap Martin. And during this trip, the I went into kind of the back room. I was invited into the back room, and sitting on the table was her mirror design that was actually being repaired. And it's similar to this, although it doesn't swivel out. It kind of just stays static. Both parts don't swivel out. Hers stays static to the wall and has one piece that swivels out, and it's a mirror, not colored glass. And the home that's there is called E1027, which is her initials and her husband's. And this house, it's kind of fraught with tension and drama. There's a whole backstory to it, where she had built it and designed it in 1929, and her a good friend at the time, Le Corbusier, had been invited to stay at the house on a number of occasions, and she left one time, and he was staying there without her, and he painted 8 large murals, all inside of the home and on the front. And so when she returned to the house, it had completely been taken over by all of his work, and she was infuriated and never returned to the house again, actually. And after that point, the house was actually credited to him, to Le Corbusier, and only until very recently has it been acknowledged as her being the designer and the architect behind it. So for this work, I cut and slumped the glass in a kiln. This is where you put the glass cut flat in a kiln. The temperature is raised really high, and then the glass sort of melts down. And I then took these pucks of ceramic fiber and placed them where I wanted the photographs to be, so that they then took that form and sort of made a bed for these photographs. So I'm going to leave it at there for now and turn it over to Mia. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. My name is Mia Donovan, and I'm a documentary filmmaker. And I started off as a photographer. I'll start by reading my bio. So I often document the human experience from a social justice perspective. And my work often recontextualizes historical archives as a means of better understanding and representing the mental landscape of those participating in my projects. So I've decided to approach this talk a little differently than Lorna's because my work is very long-term. Most of my projects take about 5 years. So I wanted to start by introducing how I started doing documentary films from my photographic practice. When I was doing photography, I was very interested in portraiture. And I was wondering if there is a way to get this screen on from the computer. Thank you. Sorry about that, guys. So my practice I started as a documentary photographer doing mostly portraiture. There we go. Thank you. Thank you. Let's see. So thank you, everyone, for your patience. A bit of a hiccup with this work. So I started doing documentary photography, and the first series I did was a series on sex workers in Montreal, and they were a series of portraits, but very like staged portraits of women working in the place that they were working, and during the process of creating this series, I'm just trying to get these on full screen, but maybe it doesn't work. I would spend, hours taking pictures with these women, and then, thank you. Thank you. I've never used this program before. So I started doing a series of portraits of sex workers in Montreal, and during this period, there was a woman who contracted HIV while shooting a porno film in Los Angeles, and I had been spending a lot of time in this world and became very, when I saw this woman on the news in Montreal, her name was Lara Rox, the media trivialized her experience quite a bit, and I wrote an email to her, a letter to her, to ask her if she wanted to participate in this documentary series. And her name was Lara, and at the time, the news had, this was 2004, so the news was, there was headlines that were saying things like, porn biz goes soft during HIV scare. So there was this sense of like, there was this like inherent kind of misogyny and almost blame towards the situation. So I decided to, after meeting her, we embarked on a journey to document her experience, which took 6 years. And, this idea of jumping from photography to documentary was quite challenging. And I didn't really understand a lot of the logic of cinema at that time, but I was interested in how do we like represent portraits in film, and how do we like represent the mental landscape of the people whose story we're telling. So I'm just starting off by looking at the term documentary, which was coined in 1926 by John Grierson, who is the founder of the NFB. And before he used this word to describe the films of Robert Flaherty, there wasn't really this distinction between documentary and narrative. It was just like film. So his original description of documentary was like the creative treatment of actuality, which I think is kind of an interesting point of departure for this distinction between like the news or reporting of actuality and like this idea of making a film or something creative about actuality. But during my practice, that description has become very problematic, and for obvious reasons. And I think looking at these photos, it is very much like this creative kind of treatment of real events. But when you get into the art of documentary storytelling and representing people who've been through a lot of trauma or misrepresented by the news, it's a very different thing. So Inside Lara Rox began when I met this woman, Lara Rox, who had just contracted HIV. And I thought I was going to set out to make a film about this woman who was going to advocate change in the industry. And while making the film, I just learned a lot about this relationship between the subject and the participants. So I wanted to show you guys a clip of a moment in the film that kind of, actually I'm going to show you two clips. So part of the inspiration for the documentary was that Lara Rox did feel very exploited by the media, and so there is a dialogue in the documentary between us trying to disrupt the dominant narrative around what happened to her. So early on in the filming, I accompanied her as she participated in a TV show, the Maury Povich show. Sorry, everyone. I'll skip through a few clips so we don't because we're cutting into our time, but I'm going back so far in my practice because I wanted to, share with you what I learned during this process in terms of ethical documentary practices. So I will skip this early clip and so during the process, I'll just keep talking. So I spent a long time filming with this woman, Lara, and we became quite naively. I just took a camera and started following her for 5 years. And when I came back after, at some point, my editor, I went away for a few weeks, and when I came back, he had re-edited a version of the film with my presence in the film. She told me, okay, so this was like a turning point in my practice, and I think where I really understood the responsibility of telling other people's stories. And so a lot of the times, we were just traveling around, sharing hotel rooms, borrowing apartments from friends, getting a few $100s here and there, and then a lot of stuff was happening off screen, but I would just have the camera rolling. So this was probably this clip I'm going to show you is a moment where me and Lara had this, after returning to Los Angeles for the first time after she came back to Montreal after testing positive for HIV, like we went back, and being young and maybe not so informed about trauma, and I didn't understand what we were really getting into. So we had this conversation that ended up being what I think most people remember about the film.
Some time alone, but she didn't tell me where she was going, so I just waited. We had a bit of an argument tonight.
Yeah. It was all my fault. I'm just joking.
Like when you took off, I was worried because I know you went off your medication, and I was afraid that maybe you did something impulsive to
prove a point.
Mm-hmm. But do you think that we had our little blow up because you're stressed out about the film or shooting?
I think, what started, I don't know, maybe we're both stressed out, but sometimes I felt afraid that you were just pretending to be my friend, and so you could get the most out of me for the doc, The only time I'm gonna really find out is after the movie comes out, the only time when I could really be sure that you're really my friend is when you're still gonna be my friend afterwards, I can't be 100% sure until then. It always feels like I just want to believe and I'm fooling myself, Anyway.
I suppose past I was worried that you didn't really want to do the documentary, but had felt, I was concerned how much you wanted to do the documentary and for what reasons.
Yeah. I maybe don't want the attention from my neighbors and everything, people I've worked with in offices and that have no idea I'm Lara Rocks, and that will when this movie comes out. And it's just important for me to confront that, because if I don't do the documentary because I'm afraid of what people are gonna think of me after, then it's just, I don't know how to say that, but it's just stupid, It's just selfish in a way.
But can you feel proud of this stuff? Like Phil Margold was saying,
Okay, thank you. I just want to, so I decided to show you guys this clip because this was a moment where the ethical implications of documentary storytelling, this is when it really started to weigh on me in terms of just, ethical, responsible storytelling practices. And this film came out in 2011, so it's a lot has changed since then. So, and since that film came out, like there was a lot of aftermath to this project coming out. Like Lara, the film, lives on, and so after that film came out, I was thinking a lot about memory and archives, and what kind of where to go next with my practice. And when I was in high school, I had a stepbrother who had been deprogrammed by a cult deprogrammer, and it was something that I remembered from high school but didn't understand really what happened. So I thought if I could find the archive, I remembered the news coming to my house. So I decided if I could find like this archive, I could make a film around it. And I was able to find the archive, which became the basis of the second film, which is a more personal film, but also a film about how like memory and archive, and how we can use archive to like reshape memory, or to reframe history.
David Robinson and his son Matthew are back together again. Robinson tried everything to...
My apologies, the aspect ratio is off. I'm sorry, how am I doing for time, Lorna? Yeah. So I know this conversation is a little bit all over the place, but my work has really, the last few projects has had a lot to do with archives, and I interested in archives because it can help us understand the mental landscape of the people we're representing, the participants of my film, but also it's a way to disrupt the dominant narrative by reframing archives, and the way archives are used as, like, to see an archive that exists as a historical record, and to compare that and juxtapose it with our memories is really interesting. So, and this happened on different levels with Deprogram, because I found this archive of my memory with my stepbrother, which I'll show you now, hopefully. And then there's another layer to the archives. Let's see if this works.
At various times as psychological, mental, or physical problems.
Well,
he's left certain clues for quite some time. I failed to recognize him until probably back in February, when he attacked me in the name of Satan and threatened to kill me.
Ted Patrick, the noted deprogrammer, brought Matthew back.
He was a mindless robot, and he did what was programmed into him.
Here's your clip, obviously, right? You put it in that way.
Okay, so I'm not sure if you guys understood what happened, but that was in 1991. It was an era of there was a moral panic called Satanic Panic, which people here are probably familiar with. It was characterized by like heavy metal music and Dungeons and Dragons, and there was a lot of like paranoia that there was a satanic kind of conspiracy happening across the United States and Canada. And my stepbrother was a rebellious teenager who listened to heavy metal, and his father hired this man, Ted Patrick, to kidnap and deprogram him. And I was 14 at the time, so this man, Ted Patrick, came to our house and had removed some items from my bedroom, like my Sonic Youth album and Stephen King books, because he deemed them potentially dangerous, like that they could attract Satan. So after I finished Inside Lara Rocks, I was remembering this story and went to find my stepbrother. And of course, he wasn't in a satanic cult. And a lot of this was just, a symptom of that era. And then I found, I went to meet this man, Ted Patrick, who was a legendary, very infamous or quite famous at the time cult deprogram in the U.S. And he actually had hundreds of Betacam videos from the 70s and 80s of deprogrammings that he had conducted by on people from various cults that were known in the 70s and 80s as cults, like the Unification Church, different groups. So I was able to find people who had been deprogrammed by Ted at these earlier dates, and then I relocated them 30 years later and showed them the tapes and kind of like re-interviewed them. So I'm going to show you a clip of, of a man that I found through this archive who didn't even realize he had been deprogrammed, and was able to kind of show him this tape. So
when I turned 19, when I was at my first year in college, I went to a very small home where the meditation was taught, probably with only 8 or 9 people. I got totally involved in working in this restaurant that I was the chef of, totally involved in meditating, and also with the friends at the restaurant. We shared cooking meals, and we'd watch Saturday Night Live, and that was a blast with half dozen people after restaurant hours. This was our life. It was a blast. But I was not spending any time with my family. I was not going home during holidays. I did not have any interest to do that. I also would go on retreats for meditation over holidays instead of going home. So that certainly annoyed my family that I wasn't there for 4th of July or Christmas. I think the other thing that upset them was that I dropped out of college. I mean, my dads did not know how to communicate well to begin with. There's a lack of communication in our family, so I never told them what was going on. One day I was going home to meet my parents for lunch, and they had 3 men there who basically jumped me, lifted me up, and threw me in the car. And so I was hauled off to 100 miles away to a home that was secluded where I met Ted Patrick at the time.
You don't think you're in a cult?
Right.
What do you think you're in?
It's a commune. It's a spiritual commune.
You don't believe that you're under mind control, that you've been psychologically kidnapped?
No, I don't. At the restaurant. My parents were there when that happened. I came over at 2 in the afternoon after cooking.
Okay. It's hard to show just clips of these projects, but so this project, Deprogrammed, started from a very personal place. A story that I thought was going to be a story about me and my stepbrother and this man, and like what happens with telling the story, telling other people's stories. My stepbrother, there was a lot more to the story, and he was not willing to share the deeper levels of what happened to him with me. So I was able to kind of like find parallels with other people, and it became a much more of like a survey film about this era. And after that, I realize I'm going to run out of time, but I will just show the most recent film, which I completed, which came out in 2020, just before the pandemic. And it's a film, it came out just before George Floyd, so there was a different, which after the conversation around documentary storytelling changed a lot in 2020, and this film tells the story of a group of political activists in the South Bronx who came to Montreal to learn acupuncture to treat heroin addiction. And the community in the South Bronx were Black, Puerto Rican, and working class white activists who were working in solidarity to fight heroin addiction and mandatory methadone programs. And oddly, they came to Montreal to learn acupuncture. And I learned about them from my acupuncturist, who had a poster on the wall in his acupuncture clinic that said, "We will fight heroin and methadone by all means necessary, educate the people." And there was these drawings of black hands with acupuncture needles and these militants with armed militants. So I was asking my acupuncturist, Mario, about this poster, and he told me how members of the Black Panthers and the Young Lords came to Montreal to learn acupuncture. And so nobody knew about this history, and the leader of this, what became the Lincoln Detox People's Program, this initiative, his name is Dr. Mutulu Shakur, and he was incarcerated for 36 years when I learned about this story. So I started corresponding with him. And the film originally was going to be, Dr. Shakur was supposed to be released in 2016, so the film was going to be a reunion film between him and Mario. Mutulu didn't get released, so the film became a call to action to raise awareness about Dr. Mutulu Shakur and his political incarceration. So I'll just leave on this clip. And this film, I did incorporate a lot of animation, a lot of archives to create the mental landscape, like the political, socio-economic landscape, and to tell this story of a counter-narrative to the war on drugs, which the war on drugs is a very complicated piece of history, and so I'll play the clip.
Like Cloud 9, where everything is fine. The fast rise
sorry, I guess
people's personal
okay,
economy grew as a result of selling drugs. Qualitatively, that overshadowed living harmoniously amongst each other, which the Panther Party was introducing. So we had to tackle the drugs now. They are noticed now. That's like. At first, we went to those who were distributing the drugs and selling drugs. We asked that they stop. They wouldn't. Then we just kindly removed them out the community.
It didn't hit the lower middle class or middle class neighborhoods. It was clearly in the areas of color. If it isn't large enough to get to the influential community, if it isn't a big media story, if it doesn't affect your kid going to school every day because you're in Forest Hills or you're...
Okay, now I'm running out of time, but I just wanted to discuss, I guess the point with this last film was as a filmmaker, a white Canadian woman, and telling a story about a community that I'm not a part of, but was very deeply committed to working with the participants of the film to provide a platform to explore this story. Like the goal was to build an impact campaign around the film, which was very successful. We're still doing a lot of community screenings, and we were able to get Dr. Shakur released from prison in 2022. And since then, so the last few years since I've been here, I've been working on another documentary about an unfolding. There's a publicity ban, so unfortunately I can't talk about it, but Yeah, I guess I'll just stop now. There's just, it's been, I think I've gone over my 20 minutes.
But thank you both for those presentations. So the format that we have is that I have a few questions for Mia and Lorna, but we're really hoping to engage all of you in the conversation, so please feel free to jump in at any point. So even after one of my questions, if there's anything that you want to kind of ask them, so just feel free to raise your hand. We're in a little bit of an intimate crowd. So my first question for both of you is, as alumni returning to the school as artists in residence with teaching appointments, I'm wondering if you can both talk to us about teaching and how the experience has influenced your artistic practices.
Sure.
Do I have to push something?
Yeah,
It's already.
Can you hear me? Yeah, thanks, Juan, and thanks for that question. Yeah, Mia and I actually started the Artist in Residence here at Concordia at the same time, and we were kind of like emailing each other, messaging each other before we began, and now I can't believe 2 years has passed, almost 2 years, and I just want to say that it's been just an incredible experience for me and working with Juan in the sculpture department. And really, the benefits I get from it directly are, so many things. But one, a sense of community here that I think is just amazing, and also new perspectives on my work. It really enables me to kind of get out of my head, which I think I need, and work with the students or engage with faculty members, and then come back to my practice with a fresh perspective. And also, to be honest, so I'm teaching the master's in sculpture and undergrad, and particularly I would say with the master's students, there's readings that I've always planned on reading, but then don't have that same sort of deadline or I haven't assigned it for a class, so I'm actually have to sit down and I'm forced to read these readings that I would have wanted to read, but then there's always something else that comes up, and so that's also been highly beneficial for me. Yeah.
Does this work? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Me and Lorna did kind of like embark on this together, like when we were writing our syllabuses and like supporting each other. And I think for myself, teaching has been incredibly rewarding. And I think it's one thing to have your practice and to be in your head, but there's another thing to be able to guide students and to explain it and to verbalize and kind of to put your practice into words. And I think it's been really challenging because I'm bringing my own, I have just to understand how to guide students to discover their own perspective and to articulate their own perspective, and how to it's even now I'm having a hard time explaining it, but I think that it has just been really great to be able to share to be at this stage. It's a privilege to be able to be in a position to share what you've learned and to guide students.
That's great. Thank you. And by the way, we have a mic, so if you have something that you want to contribute, just raise your hand and we'll come to you. Maybe as a bit of a segue, what about collaboration? I feel like you both constantly work with other people to create your work. In the case of Mia, obviously your films are inherently a group effort. And for Lorna, working with glass blowers and others. So what is this process like? How do you negotiate control, for example, and what is the role of chance throughout?
Yeah, I'm happy to start that one.
I think we have a rhythm now already.
Yeah, I worked with a mentor a number of years ago, the artist and glassblower, actually, Josiah McElhenney, and he said something to me during, it was actually a residency at the Atlantic Center, and he said something to me that's just like stuck in my mind and really resonated with me. He said, as an artist, sometimes you just have to convince people that you can do the thing that you want to do. Mm-hmm. And I think that happens in my work a lot of the time, where I have to kind of be like, yes, we can do this. This is possible. And then over the years, I found the people that are willing to do the thing that is almost the impossible task. And then I've sort of have those people around me, and I know who I can call on, that are basically willing and open to pushing boundaries and pushing the limits of either a particular project or even materially, and yeah, so that's it.
Yeah, with documentaries, it's very collaborative. It's also it's challenging to make a documentary because depending on the funding and deadlines, there's, because it's a lot about listening and collaboration with the participants and trying to, especially more and more with my practice, is to have the emphasis be on the perspective of the people whose story I'm telling. And that's not just sitting down and interviewing people. It's usually years of spending a lot of time with those people and researching like with Dope is Death, researching the landscape, the socio-political landscape of the war on drugs and what was happening in the United States during that era. And so that takes years of research, and it's not the most convenient way to make a film when it comes to broadcasters, because they don't necessarily, or funders, they don't necessarily understand the time it takes where you need to spend time with people and not have the cameras on. So it's challenging, but I think as time goes on, like I also tend to work with the same people for years, and so you have this kind of this trust. And but for documentaries, it's, for me, with Dope is Death, more than any other film, it was having a lot of the participants become consultants on the film during the edit process. Mm-hmm. So, and then also using archives is a whole other thing. Mm-hmm. It's very expensive, but it was very important also. So yeah, they're very long. The documentaries I do take about 5 years, and it's not necessarily the most sustainable practice. And I'm not sure I can continue to do that. I think going forward, I don't know that I can continue to make films over 5 years, but yeah.
Do we have a question from anybody by any chance? Well, so maybe as a perfect segue that you mentioned archives, both of your practices have a relationship to archives and history, as you both often engaged with a historical document or moment as a point of reference, sometimes little known, that initiates a body of work. So I guess I wanted to ask you if you can talk to us about what this aspect of your research is like. How do you first encounter this archives, these little known moments or histories? And yeah, if you can talk to us a little bit about that. So I think we're going to start with Lorna.
Yeah, for me, and it seems like maybe for you too, for you as well, it often just starts with a chance encounter, or a particular thing when before I would travel a lot, and now not as much, but it would often be, on these trips, that I would encounter something that would pique my interest, and then you kind of, you tug a little bit, and then things begin to unfold. And yeah, so it's usually just, it just starts really by chance like this.
Is there a way that you can recognize that there's enough kind of like depth to that thing that you first that document, that little thing that you saw when you were at the acupuncturist, like that there's enough there? How do you know that that's worth kind of pursuing? Can you tell right away, or you just kind of engage with it a little bit longer?
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah, I usually just, if I just kind of dive in, and if I find that there's enough there, what I often do is I'll write a research grant and hopefully get it, and then start to pick away and unearth. I mean, there's definitely been times where I'll start something and, I just don't continue the project because of a lack of interest or depth there. And then those projects kind of tend to go on the wayside. I think with Yumi, they might be a much longer process. I definitely don't have projects where I've undergone research for upwards of 5 years. Yeah.
I mean, for myself, I have a lot of projects that may not go anywhere. That I have like, I'm kind of constantly, I have several projects I'm always researching, and if they take off, it's a lot with documentary too. It's about the relationships that you're building with the people, and not everybody not every story has the same motivation behind it. Like with Dopa's death, everyone was motivated to participate in the film because Dr. Shakur was incarcerated, and everyone wanted to do what they could to provide this, to build this counter narrative of who the United States government, how he was labeled as a criminal. So it was really important for everyone to participate in this, creating this counter narrative. Mm-hmm. And with Lara Rocks, the same thing for different reasons. She wanted people to understand that that she wasn't just this dumb, naive girl who was, taken advantage of in this way. Like, she wanted people to understand what the industry was like, and the powers, the coercive persuasion that goes on in the sex industry when you have 18-year-old girls coming in to LA from all over the world, and you have these agents in their mid-30s, and there's nobody out there looking out for the health and safety of these people, of these women. And Deprogrammed, it was similar. Different story, but there was a similar motivation in that I felt that what happened to my stepbrother was very traumatic, and the fact that, the trauma that he continues to experience because he was kidnapped when he was 14 by these men and held for 5 days for no reason. So there was that motivation. Mm-hmm. And everyone who I interviewed were either motivated because their deprogramming, they felt it was successful in that it got them out of a dangerous cult, or they were motivated because they felt that their free will had been violated or their freedom of religion had been infringed. So there's always a motivation. So, and sometimes the motivation's there, but the funds aren't there too. So there's a lot of different factors. It's very hard to just, as much as I want to make the films without funding, it's like, it can be very hard, because you can't do it on your own, and not everybody's going to work for free.
Yeah, for me as well, like often I'll have a project that I believe in, and I won't get the funding, and so then it goes on the wayside, at least for the short term. Mm-hmm. And I might revisit it or I might not. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. So I just have one more question for each of you. Obviously, your practices are very different in so many different ways, but I was also kind of quite taken aback by the overlaps that I did see in so many different aspects. But anyway, so I have separate questions, and then we'll just open it up to the floor for anybody who wants to ask you a question. So this question is for Lorna. Lorna, I find it fascinating that your sculptures are kind of photographic in their relationship to time and process. We obviously associate photography with the idea of freezing or capturing a moment in time, and yet I find it fascinating that your sculptures often present a process arrested in its tracks. Things seem to be caught amid an event that was unfolding. It makes me think that you're a sculptor with the eye of a photographer. Does that make sense? I guess my question is if you can speak about the extended role of photography in your practice.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Juan. Yeah, I'm not even sure if it was mentioned, but me and I know each other from undergrad in the photo department. So we both, I'm not sure, yeah. So we both have those similar origins and then really took off in different directions. And sculpture is relatively new for me, maybe 8 or 9 years. And slowly but surely, I actually find the two, I'm starting to work with the two mediums for the first time simultaneously, like you saw in the last project. And I'm actually just finishing a project right now where this is something I've been wanting to do for many, many years. I'm using hand mirroring. So basically making a chemical compound and mirroring glass. And this process uses silver nitrate. And there's all of these connections between the mirroring process and using the silver and the chemicals, which are the same compounds as in photography. So really right now there's a bunch of overlaps that I'm happy about. And also, yeah, for me, photography is kind of my safe place. It's the place that I feel really comfortable in, that I don't need anyone else. So there's also certain freedom in that, where if, let's say, I'm going to embark on a residency or a project, I'll often have my primary project that I want to work on there, and then I'll have a parallel sort of photographic practice that I'll do while I'm undertaking that same project, because I can just rely on myself and the camera. So I like having that sense of control. Yeah, so I'm not sure if that answered your question.
No, it does, yeah, thank you. Okay, so question for Mia. Mia, as you also come from a photography background, I'm wondering if you can talk to us about how and when that shift from still to moving images happened. What did it offer or open in your work? And this, I guess, is a two-part question in a way. But I also want to ask you about the documentary genre. There's always a decision to be made about proximity and distance, and I think you talked a little bit about that. But so whether to be in front or behind the camera, inside or outside the frame, how do you negotiate that relationship to framing and to your subject? So sorry, like different questions, but there's two in there.
Yeah. Well, I think if I can start with the first part of the question, which is the relationship between photo. What was the first part of the question?
Just kind of like, because you also come from that photography background. So at what moment that shift from still to moving images happened?
Yes.
And then, yeah, the role that maybe photography still has in your practice in one way or another.
Yes. Well, it actually, when I first started documentary filmmaking, it was almost accidental, because when I asked Lara to participate in my photo series, I wrote her a letter in French, and she thought I meant documentary film. And after speaking to her, I basically was like, okay, let's do. I sort of just jumped in. And it also came, like when I had my first photo exhibit, friends of mine said that I would just stand around the portraits and just talk about the people in the photos for I would just keep telling people stories about the women. So I felt like in a way that there was limits with the frame of the photo. And with Lara's story, it was important to tell it, and then I just didn't stop. And I've always been present in the documentaries, except with Dopin's death. It just felt, it's the first documentary that I did where it was really like, I'm going to see how I can provide a space, like a platform to tell a more collaborative story, because it's not my story in the same way that Inside Lara Rocks and Deprogrammed is. Dopin's death was much more challenging, more political, and much more about white supremacy, like race, like there was just so many layers, and with solidarity and anti-imperialism, anti-capitalism. So it was more like a movement. Like the film, it's not a biofilm. It's like a glimpse into a political movement. And so that film was the most ambitious and probably the most impactful. And now I'm actually going, I think after that, I'm like going back to photography. Because it is hard. Your whole life really changes. You know, I think it was really hard to, all the films are challenging, but with Dope as Death, also Dr. Shakur, he did get out of prison, but then he passed away from cancer. So it's a lot, like I feel like I'm taking a break. I'm going back to photography. Well, I actually did start another documentary that will probably also take 5 years. And it's already actually pretty intense.
Is that the Lara Rocks documentary? Is that the documentary that you feel like you're the most present within the documentary?
Yes.
It seems to me that that's the case.
Yeah, and it's mostly because I just, out of not knowing the rules. Like once you know the rules, it's hard to go back. But I think because I didn't know the rules, like I would never be able to make that film today. But I think there was just no way of not having me in it, because simple rules that everybody knows, when you ask somebody a question, like if I say, Lorna, when were you born? You'll say, I was born. But I didn't, even things like that I didn't know. So it was impossible to not have me in it. But you know, I think, yeah, it's a, I think, I don't know if that answered the question.
No,
but
it does.
I think,
and I mean, I feel like in a way, it's also kind of maybe relevant to you, this question of proximity and distance. Like I know that we can see your reflection in some of your photographs, or at least one of them that I know of, but not all of them. But also by working with other people, you also have this kind of, you know, different distance to the work in different ways. So is that, you know, does that resonate with you a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, and quite literally with the new work, it's which I didn't show because I just finished it. It's a mirror, so I'm making mirrored pieces that you could see your reflection in, and I didn't really go into my photographic work too much because of the time constraints and whatnot. But yeah, a lot of times I'll photograph into architecture, and then what happens, like modernist architecture primarily, and usually with those architectural structures, they're made of glass, and so what ends up happening is I'm reflected in those pictures, and you could see the camera, and sometimes that's very intentional, and then other times I'll kind of shift the camera so that I'm not being reflected. Yeah.
Well, that's an overlap between both of your practices that I find interesting. This kind of like, you know, the author and then revealing, or the subjectivity of the author being kind of revealed in the document itself, in the case of that photograph or in the case of that documentary too. But yeah, but perhaps it's a good time to open it up for questions. I can see at least one hand.
Hey, I have a question for Mia, just about, I guess, like the evolution of your ethics in relation to storytelling, and where you're wanting to move forward with, like, really, like, kind of the keywords that are in my mind are like, yeah, proximity, but more proximity in terms of the relationships within your documentary work, or photography work, if that's kind of more of the path that you're moving on, and then also like, yeah, proximity, enmeshment, and like relationship building are kind of the keywords. Curious about.
It's a hard question to answer, because it's very hard for me, because I'm motivated to do documentaries, because I'm very suspicious of the media and the dominant narratives that are created in whether it be Hollywood or like mainstream, you know, documentary tropes, storytelling tropes. So I feel like I owe it, whoever trusts me to tell their story, I owe it to them to kind of like It's hard because I'm doing a new project about these women who are leaving a high control cult, and there's a lot of sexual assault. And for the first time, I'm working with a trauma-informed therapist, actually, which is a new thing. And I don't even think I would have thought about doing that with Inside Lara Rocks. It really, the conversations around documentary practices was a lot different. And so today, we have like intimacy coaches working on films. There's much more, people are able to put in their funding, trauma-informed therapists. And so this is a very different thing. So I'm learning, it's in the early production phase, but it's the first time where I've actually been able to to have a coach. I have a therapist on hand. It sounds, I keep thinking of the Metallica documentary. I don't know if you guys saw it, where they're recording an album and they have a therapist that they pay $40,000 a month while they're recording the album. It's a really great film. You guys should see it. I just always think of it because that was the first time I ever thought a therapist involved in when people are working together. But so yeah, that's something that is new for me. I don't know if that answers the question, but
thanks for the question.
Thank you.
Anybody else by any chance? I can't quite see in the back. I don't know if Hans you can see.
I have a light question for Lorna.
Yeah.
You mentioned that a lot of your do I need the microphone? Okay, sorry.
For the big crowd.
Yeah. You mentioned that, well, very loud. You mentioned that a lot of, I think, off of one of your questions, Juan, where you asked about the moments of kind of insight or inspiration that happen to kind of lead, that sort of give you this spark to lead you to a project or a way of thinking. And you mentioned that a lot of this would happen for you with travel, and then you said, I don't do that so much anymore. So as a light question, do you feel there's a loss or is there a future for more travel, or how do you find your spark now that maybe travel isn't so much on the books?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question. So 2 life moments changed, and so I don't travel as much. One that we all went through, which was the pandemic, and then the second one was becoming a mother, and then the kind of creative changes that one is sort of forced to make or accommodate because of that. So I'm trying to redefine how I'm making my work, which is very challenging, to be honest. And so for me, what I'm doing is I'm actually really glad that I have a sculptural practice as well, because I find myself more grounded in the materials. And so I'm really trying to weave through the material practices and get inspired in that way. And I mentioned that right now I'm working on hand mirroring, and this is something that I've wanted to do for eight or so years. So I'm doing that. And yeah, just kind of trying to redefine the boundaries of my practice and how I make work. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. Anybody else? We're right on time at 7:30. So if there aren't any other questions, please, thank you so much for joining us, and join me in applauding and thanking Lorna and Mia. And thank you, Hans, and everybody involved in putting this together.
We'll quickly just mention that we have our final SICA event of the season 2 weeks from now on April 5th, where we'll have Ingrid Bachmann, who is the founder of SICA. So please join us then. We encourage you to check out the MFA gallery. It's open until 9, and we also invite you guys to join us at N Bar for drinks. So thank you all.